It is episode 16 of the Force with Friends podcast, and we are breaking down Return of the Jedi. Welcome back. This is Will with the Padawan Pops YouTube channel and my friend and co-host Kevin. And if you are unaware, this is week 6 now, we have been going through the story of Star Wars. So we're looking at it as one big perfect story, episodes 1 through 9. We're trying to weave all the different themes and main points in for the Skywalker family. And so today we find ourselves at the almost end of the road with the original trilogy wrapping up in Return of the Jedi. So we're going to give it our best shot at making this make sense, looking at it from a big picture standpoint. So Kevin, initial thoughts on Return of the Jedi?
First off, I would say if you've never gone through the movies like this, like we are, it's a really cool experience. We were just talking about how I feel like I've picked up on a lot of really cool connections just between all the movies. So if you've never done this, I would highly recommend it. It's been, for someone like me who's watched Star Wars his whole life, just sitting down and tackling it one movie at a time and connecting all the pieces has been really fun. So I mentioned it last week. Return of the Jedi is my favorite. It's always been my favorite. I think now I just have even more reasons for it to be my favorite. To me, there's not really much in this movie I don't like. I have qualms with the very, very beginning, but that's about it. But no, I mean, it was already my favorite. It's still my favorite. Just made it more my favorite. So
yeah, I agree with every bit of that. So for me, I have been an Empire Strikes Back person like forever. So we talked about it last week, though. I was worried that this might dethrone Empire after I watched it the way we're going through it. And lo and behold, I think it has.
It happened.
I mean, you pick up on so much. And we were texting earlier today because I didn't watch it till after work. So like I just quit watching the movie 25-ish minutes ago. And I mean, there's so much in this movie, and I didn't even mind the Tatooine part. Like typically that's one of my I can't handle it scenes in Star Wars. It's the same as pod racing in episode 1,
I like
Canto
pod
Bight
racing.
in episode 8, the asteroid in Empire Strikes Back. I'm not a big fan of that. But now Canto Bight's easily the worst of all that. But still, I've never been a big fan of the whole Tatooine portion of this movie. And then today didn't even bother me a little. It was like I was just watching all these characters grow up before my eyes right here. You know, it's been a year hiatus, and here they are. So I think this is my favorite Star Wars movie, which is, I was going to say, it's a little unfortunate because I made a ranking list like a month or two ago.
And now
so
I'm
gonna have to flip 1 and 2 now.
Yeah, I was gonna say, to be fair, the beginning's not that bad. It's really just everybody arriving at Jabba's palace, which is fine. I get they all got to be there. It's just when Lucas felt the need to throw in this musical number, that's the part that gets me. Like, you got this scantily clad pufferfish singing some upbeat musical number. Like, to me, that's like, okay, where are we going with this? Like, if that hadn't been slipped in there, it might be a little more manageable for me. But that scene always just, it's like, what is this? This is this is ridiculous. So once we get to the Dune Sea battle, I'm good. Like at that point, it's my best. So
yeah, I think that's kind of the same with me. It's just so slow to me how it starts. And by the time you get to the Dune Sea battle, that's like 5 minutes and they're off essentially. So
yeah, it's a quick.
I was okay with it. So today I've got 4 topics for us to run through, which we're going to start off with the Jedi Knight, talking about Luke Skywalker, a year removed from Empire Strike Back. Mm-hmm. We're going to look at the sister, which is Princess Leia, revealed to be Luke's sister. We are going to It's a Trap. Palpatine has laid the ultimate trap for the rebellion, and Akbar acknowledges it, right? And then lastly, Return of the Jedi, talking about Anakin Skywalker, the chosen one, turning back to the light side. So let's start off with Luke Skywalker, the Jedi Knight. The movie starts off, we're in Tatooine, and I mean, it starts off with the droids, and then you get that scene with Vader on the ship. But then it's all kind of building up to Luke Skywalker showing up to rescue Han Solo.
Yeah.
And to me, the first thing that jumped out, and I've never thought about it this way before, was how similar it is to it's the opposite of Empire Strikes Back. So Luke is going to save his friends and he goes into peril and he's not ready. This time, this is a well concocted plan to go get Han Solo. Now, the peril, probably not as much as going to fight Darth Vader in Empire, but still, Luke, his character hasn't changed as far as he still cares about his friends. He's going to rescue them, all that stuff. But the way he goes about it is so measured compared to what we see in Empire.
Yeah, I think it was really smart of them to start off this movie just showing his growth, just both as like a leader, but also as a Jedi, right? Like you start off Empire and the dude can barely force pull a lightsaber. He's not the most formidable in combat, but here he is. Like he really gets to show off, like, hey, I've learned some new things, and so he's deflecting blasters. He's jumping around, slashing people. Like it's a really good way to start to see, like, oh, Luke's really moved up to another level here. And so it is really cool that they kick off the movie with that, because then you have that expectation for him really for the rest of the film, that he is this guy now who can maybe do something. He's not the same helpless person he was at the end of Empire. So I do like that they get that off quick and that they really introduce that right at the forefront of this movie, because it's fun to see like that immediate growth and change for him.
Yeah. I think too, it's cool. Like in Empire, Luke says to Vader, like, you'll find I'm full of surprises or something like that, almost kind of like arrogantly and as if it is a surprise that I'm got any bit of ability here. But in this movie, he tells Jabba, like, hey, don't underestimate my power. It's almost as if it's a threat. And obviously it's a little bit of a foreshadowing to the temptation he'll face in this movie. Although for him, I don't think it's ever truly that much of one as to what it was to Vader. But still, it's almost not Jedi like, hey, don't underestimate my abilities. And we hear Anakin saying that in episode 3 as well.
I was about to say it's very Anakin-like, right?
I don't know if it was planned, like Anakin saying that in episode 3. I'm sure George probably wasn't thinking back to this one line in Jabba's palace, but it fits.
There's so much stuff in this movie that tracks back to the prequels that I'm just like, there's no way it works so well, but I'm just like, there's no way all this was planned. I don't know. But yeah, no, it's a very Anakin thing, right? Like he tells Jabba, like, this is the last mistake you'll ever make. Like that is a threat, right? Like this, he's definitely going in there cocky and confident, which is very much like his father. And he backs it up, right? Like he does what he says.
And we get the black and brown robes too, which he's wearing the brown cloak, but the black robes. And Anakin is essentially wearing dark brown and some black in episode 3 as well. So
that's true.
It's pretty cool to see those connections between Anakin and Luke. And those connections, obviously, they're going to build on them as the movie goes on. Let's get past Tatooine with Luke. I mean, he kicks butt, but he's fighting, a bunch of Tatooine people and bounty hunters. Not quite the same. Contrasting again with episode 5, he leaves Dagobah not ready. They're all split up. But here he does come back to finish his training with Yoda. And the big question on his mind, and if you put yourself in 1983 with everyone else sitting in theaters, was Vader lying or not? So like one of the first things he asked Yoda was, is he my father? Confronts that. Yoda says, yeah, he is. He gets scolded a little bit for going back to Empire. Yoda scolds him, saying it's unfortunate that he left and went and fought Vader because he wasn't ready to know that information yet. And so now he's ready. He's learned that the only thing he has left to officially being a Jedi Knight is confronting Vader now that he's ready. That's the news that Yoda gives him.
Yeah, and it's there's two kind of assessments that they've had of Luke, of him not being ready, and like there's a side of it where he wasn't ready. Like there's no way he was going to beat Vader. But I do feel like he's successful, and the other side of that is they didn't give him enough credit, I feel like, going into this, that maybe he could make the right decision, because despite the fact he loses, he chooses the right thing. And so there's kind of two sides to that, where he was ready to make his own decision and kind of do the right thing, but definitely not ready to fight. Definitely right. But I think that's all that's on Yoda and Kenobi's mind, is defeating Vader, right? There's no scenario in their head where this redemption occurs. And so their entire focus is on beating him in combat and defeating him, which is not where we see Luke, right? Like as soon as he realizes and he's talking to Yoda about, yeah, no, this actually is your father, he's immediately like, I can't do that, right? Like I can't kill my father.
Yeah.
Which is a really interesting response considering it's not like he's got a lot of history with the guy, right? But he's a lot like Anakin, right? And this desire to, connect with something meaningful, and this instance his dad, right? The father he never had. It's a powerful motivator for him, and he immediately is like, I can't do it, right? Like I can't kill him. So
Yeah.
it's a really interesting discussion that they have when that reveal occurs, which I'm assuming we'll get to also with Obi-Wan, but that discussion as well.
Yeah, and I think it was interesting what you said with Yoda and Obi-Wan had already decided Anakin was gone. I feel like the hierarchy of that decision goes from Yoda knew in episode 3 it was over, and then in Kenobi, once Obi-Wan learns that Anakin lived, he talks to him as Anakin, but at the end he's like, okay, it's just Vader. Like Anakin,
he kind of gives up on that idea for sure.
Yeah, which not his fault. Anakin literally tells him to give up on it. And
Yeah.
and then you get to naive Luke who still thinks there's hope, and ultimately he was right. And so it's a cool thing. But yeah, Luke has come a long way from episode 5. It's almost as if in this movie he does the exact opposite of Empire Strikes Back. It even is this is kind of going back a little bit, but there's a contrast between when he's fighting that Wampa in episode 5 to how he just defeats the Rancor just like that in episode 6.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
He's struggling to use the Force in 5, and then he's like jumping around, he's putting that big stick in its mouth, and I mean, it's a completely different Luke. So
it is,
crazy what can happen in just 1 year for him.
Which I don't think there's really a major official canon on that, but doesn't he find like a holocron in a comic or something? I think that happens somewhere.
There are comics that follow the Luke, Han, and Leia in between all 3. I haven't got into those yet. I'm still into just the Vader, which are still releasing a few times a year.
I just feel like I saw that somewhere.
I do have a little bit of info from the Vader thing to throw into this when we get there. So,
okay.
As far as Luke goes, do you have anything else for him? Because I know some of it will tie in later with the Return of the Jedi.
No, I think just with coming off of Dagobah, it's interesting how insistent he is over Yoda and Obi-Wan that there's a chance for redemption for his dad. Because Kenobi says, like, if you can't kill him, then maybe the Emperor's already won, right? Like, Kenobi is so far down that road that he's like, if you're not even willing to kill him, then there's no hope, right? But Luke, for whatever reason, is insistent that he has, and he says, he's like, I've sensed the good in him. I don't know if it's the fact that he's his son, that he's picking up on something that other people can't, but he is 100%, like, there's no doubt in his mind that there's a possibility that he can restore his father, which I just find really interesting because, again, it goes back to his naivety and all that, but he's willing to reject these people who knew him and trained him just on his gut feeling. And so I love that that's the attitude he takes into it, because that's what is the necessary attitude that allows it to happen. So I really like that interaction between him and Obi-Wan, because there's nothing really Obi-Wan can do to sway Luke on that. He's pretty committed to the idea of redemption.
For sure. And he does tell Vader later in the movie, you couldn't kill me in our last fight because you cared, or something along those lines. So I think there may have been a little bit that he was picking up on just from his experiences, obviously, that no one else was. Yeah, that talk with Obi-Wan, that you get the whole from a certain point of view spiel, which is the backbone of Star Wars. Because if you're going to have an intellectual property this big, there's going to be a lot of contradictions here and there and things like that. So when you throw in that whole, well, from a certain point of view, it's
little loophole.
Yeah, so that kind of brings us into a spot going forward in Star Wars. You can say, well, if you look at it from this way, it makes sense. And that was a pretty smart thing to throw in there, intentional or not. But in that conversation, he learns that he has a sister, and obviously Luke's intuition is just impeccable because it's Leia, just like that. He knows. Now, obviously, there's a time constraint, so there's not a lot of exploring for him to do. Just, hey, he knows it through the Force. So either way, we learn that Leia is his sister. Leia is the one that Yoda spoke of in episode
Mm-hmm.
5, saying there is another, and
Yeah.
he's insisting on it again here. And then we learn that the other hope is Leia. And so that's a big crowning point of this story is in episode 3. They are separated. We obviously see them in 4 and 5, but they have no clue that they have
Yeah.
any relation. And so here it's the family coming back together.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I think I saw a meme, it was a few weeks ago, where it was just talking about how it's like literally the only woman he knows, right? And it happens to be
Yeah.
his sister.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, it's the one woman I
Unfortunate.
know. So, but anyway, yeah, no, he picks up on it pretty quick. Maybe it's a family thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't have any qualms with how this movie went, right? Like, again, it's my favorite movie. I do wish they had leaned into that a little bit more. I don't know how. I don't know where that would have fit into the narrative. But they really do keep Luke and Leia on very separate courses within this trilogy, to where Luke pretty much stays completely on the side of the Force story. Leia stays pretty much completely on the side of the Rebel versus the Empire story. They don't really ever cross, except for a few conversations. So that is one thing I wish somehow had gotten a little more attention in this movie is the fact that she is the daughter of Anakin Skywalker. We pick it up a few places, and she senses some things in the movie, but for such a big reveal, there is a little bit of a letdown that it's not really touched on. I mean, it's brought up later. It's a big part of Vader and Luke's fight. But as for Leia herself, she's really kind of left out of this whole Force thing throughout really the whole trilogy. So that would be my one criticism for this movie, is I wish that had been brought in a little bit more, but I don't know where. I don't know how. I mean, the movie flows pretty well for the rest of it. So that may be a bit of a nitpick complaint.
Yeah, it's almost as if that, I mean, I don't know when it was decided that she was going to be the sister as
That's
far
true.
as in George's head. And I'm sure that
Yeah.
answer may never come out, or maybe it's out there and I have no clue. I'm sure the answer is, oh, he always knew, but I don't know that. I don't know
I
that
don't
I
buy
buy that.
it.
I don't buy a lot of that.
Nope.
So it's interesting I think Leia being his sister is almost a growth point for Luke, more so than it is like character development for Leia. Now, obviously, knowing this in this movie, in 7, 8, and 9, we'll touch on it a lot. Like, you got to respect what they tried to do with making Leia this big focal point, because honestly, it was necessary, having just learned that she is a Skywalker. I think it deserves some follow-up. Things didn't go, I'm sure, as they planned, but because of Carrie Fisher's passing. But I do appreciate the fact that they tried to give us a little bit more of that. Still, with Leia being a Skywalker, you get all of them in this battle at the end. So you got Luke and Vader fighting, but you've also got another Skywalker leading the ground war against the Empire. So I think it's just a really cool picture, seeing, if this is a Skywalker story, how it all culminates at Endor, technically, at this point, and it's just moving up to this one big head. And I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I will, as much as that was a nitpick, I do credit the story that she never fades into the background, right? Like, she's always at the forefront of this conflict and is essential to the success in the story, right? So I mean, there's no point where she becomes a sidekick or an afterthought. So it's not a big complaint. It makes sense for where she is and how the story goes. But yeah, within this larger narrative, you have the remaining Skywalker family all involved in this kind of final conflict of the rebellion versus the Empire. So that is a pretty cool setup.
And as far as her Force sensitivity goes, is your head canon that her knowing what Padme looked like when Luke is asking her in the movie, do you think that's like a Force, like, essence type thing? Because the only opportunity she had to know her mother was the exact same opportunity Luke had. So which I know women forget nothing. Maybe that's it. I don't know.
I think you can create whatever head canon you want. I've never really developed one, just because that, to me, that's just so clearly like a misalignment, right, between the movies. That was something that was put in this before the prequels were ever gonna be a thing, and so it's just one of those things now with the with the two sets of movies that I'm just gonna have to be like, doesn't match, but it is what it is. But that is interesting. I hadn't heard that before. Is that a thing?
I don't know
Force
that
essence?
I've heard it anywhere, if I just like the idea.
I think that's one I just gave up on. I don't think I ever tried to explain that one. So
I mean, I don't think about it a lot, but I did think about it in this in this. Honestly, I'd forgot she said that. And then here it's like, oh yeah, she did say that. So I like to think that maybe it was just she could kind of, she had this force inclination or something. I don't know. I'm
That's
sure
fair.
there's some explanation. I'll have to look it up after.
I feel like it's as good as any explanation. So
Yeah.
that's a
So
great scene though,
yeah.
because it's done so well. Because there should be this joy in having family, right? But it's crushed by this realization of who her father is. And so she's just kind of left there, just really like stunned and just kind of broken by that news. And so it's one of those things where it's really cool how that unfolds. And she learns that Luke is her brother, but within that good news, there's this news that, oh, but that means this guy's your father. So
Yeah.
that's a cool scene. There's a lot of really good scenes in here, just character moments that I thought were done really well.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And so kind of on what we were talking about, so we see Luke with Vader going on to the second Death Star. We see Leia doing the ground war on Endor. That brings us to it's a trap. So Palpatine has laid out this plan, and
Yep.
he's essentially putting all of his chips on the table. And he's saying, I'm going to draw the entire Rebel fleet to this forest moon of Endor. And when they're there, I'm going to have this second Death Star ready to blow the moon up. I'm gonna have them all there. We're gonna wipe them out, and it's gonna go perfect. I'm luring them in, and so he lures them in. I think it's interesting that his big battle plan is another Death Star, because we get like really mad at the sequels for all of the other Death Stars they make. But technically, I mean, I'm not condoning the poor planning of the sequels, but George was making second Death Stars too. Like we've never been able to shake it.
They have a pattern of loving some super weapons. I mean that's an original trilogy concept. So
they just
he
like,
does.
let's make it bigger.
And I love that this whole plan too is really for the purpose of breaking Luke, right? We'll get into that, but like it's all a show for him to break down Luke and try to turn him to the dark side. Like I don't know that he ever really is worried about this rebellion, because with this operational Death Star, he can wipe them out anytime at any point.
That's
but
true.
He stages it now to have this show for Luke. To really wear down his resolve and to watch his friends die. I mean, it is the perfect plan and almost works. But yeah, there's oh man, I don't even know where to start in the end of this movie, because there's so many good moments, starting with, I guess, with Luke's meeting with Vader, right? When they meet on Endor and they have that talk that kind of leads into this battle. There's some really cool things that are said there.
Yeah, so they're drawing, so sticking with Palpatine for just a minute. So kind of looking at what he's done from 1 through 5 up to this point, he's terrible as far as a human being goes, which it's a excellently written character. He suckers in the Republic. He's ruling with an iron fist, but in episodes 4 and 5, you don't necessarily see that kind of maniacal side of Palpatine. You don't see him at all in 4. You just know he's running a strong empire. In episode 5, you get a little bit, and he is very much interested in Luke Skywalker, but that's about the extent of it. Mainly, we're just seeing this really strong empire getting revenge. But in episode 6, we get a little bit more of that Palpatine that we know in the prequels, where he is coming up with this plan, and he's using mind games, and he's being the I don't want to say the politician, but he's playing chess with Luke and with the rebellion and everything like that, as opposed to 4 and 5. He's really just a name out there versus a character with qualities and things like that we can draw back to. So this whole trap here plays into Palpatine a lot.
Yeah, it is. You're right. I hadn't thought about that, but it is much more like 1 through 3 Palpatine, where he's able to execute this thing that's going to, in his mind, solve all his problems at once, right? And so that's a good way to look at it. I hadn't thought about that. He does kind of go back to prequel Palpatine in 6.
Which is the first time in this, and he has more than like 2 lines in the whole trilogy. He's only around for like 20 minutes of screen time in the whole original trilogy anyway.
Yeah,
so
he's used so well in episode 6, though. I feel like all of his presence and his time and his lines are really hammer home who he is and what he's trying to do.
I love the idea that the rebels think that the shields don't work
Oh yeah.
on the Death Star, and when they get that realization, they're like, turn around, and so all the
Yep.
ships are just peeling backwards and everything. I just really like the idea that it's almost the same deal. It's like, oh, they did this a few years ago, we're gonna get them in thinking they're doing the same thing here, but we've
Yeah.
got them. It's such a great war maneuver.
That whole battle's great. I fell in love with that space battle as a kid
Yeah.
because, I mean, at the time, there was nothing else like that on screen. Just this massive space war. I love every part of that space battle when they go in close toe to toe with the Star Destroyers and that all. Yeah, I mean, that's not really related to the overall story, but I love that whole space battle scene. It's one of my favorite parts of the movie for sure.
Yeah, I do too. It's to me, it's not the trench run on episode 4, but it's right there at
Yeah.
it. I think as far as the trap aspect goes, I don't think there's too much more to talk about other than the trap has been laid to draw
It's a good
Luke
trap.
in. The rebellion shows up. Like it's almost perfect for Palpatine had the Return of the Jedi not happened. So we start off with Luke and Vader's conversation going up to the Death Star on Endor. That is a very lore heavy scene there. He's talking about Anakin, he's being Vader, but he's also showing some cracks in the armor in this conversation. And I think that's when the audience is starting to think, oh, maybe he can turn.
I thought this was so well done, especially by James Earl Jones, because throughout this entire trilogy, Vader in his presentation and the way he commands things is just this assured, confident, menacing force, right? Like this thing that you run away from. But in this scene with Luke, he doesn't feel dangerous, right? He feels subdued. And it's the first time it's the first time in the trilogy that I feel this way about Vader, that he's not a threat right now. And so the way that they wrote him and the way Jones plays him and just his voice in that scene is, he says some really cool things that point to that he is just this broken, hopeless guy, right? He's not, he understands now. He says some things about how manipulative or about how powerful Palpatine is that allude to the fact that he understands he was duped. Right, that he's in this thing now and he can't get out. And so it's a really, really cool change that we see from episode 5, because we talked about it a little bit last week, right? Like in episode 5, he has that conversation with Luke where he reveals that he's his father. And one of the things I did want to touch back on is we got some good comments from that video, people talking about, that was really just to manipulate Luke, which it was, right? The whole purpose, it's not an emotional appeal for Vader. Like he's just saying this, but somebody in the comments said something about, just saying it kind of woke up that part of Anakin, which I really like that being worded that way. Because I think that's what happens, right? Like he has this moment where he has to acknowledge, and then we see him transformed from 4 to 5. Like now when he's in Luke's presence, he's such a different person. And I love the line he says it at the end of that conversation where Luke's like, we can get away from this, like come with me. And he says, it's too late for me, my son. Right. And so just in that line, it's like there was a wish there. There was like a desire that he could. And that's not Vader, right? Like that's so far from who Vader's been and all the rejection. And he tries earlier. He says, that name means nothing to me anymore when Luke brings up Anakin Skywalker. But then he speaks out the other side of his mouth and it's just like, well, it's too late for me. That comment right there always, it's such a great line because it's so simple, but it speaks to like, he wishes there was a way, right? If only there was, but he's just like, you just got to give up, right? Like, yeah, I want that too, but there's no hope here. You don't understand the power of the dark side. You don't understand the power of Palpatine. We get just this hopeless, resigned Vader, which is so different from the Vader we've seen the entire rest of the trilogy. So I love that scene so much because it's just such a different Vader. And I thought, again, it was just written and played really, really well.
I agree. And so so the same way that opening crawl in A New Hope is, you can take all of Rogue One and the emotion from that and throw it into that opening crawl of A New Hope.
Yeah.
This one bit of dialogue between Vader and Luke, you can take the whole Vader comic series and you just follow Vader all the way through, which is following him from episode 5 to 6, and you can throw the entire series into this one conversation that he has with Luke. So
that's cool.
Vader, it starts off Palpatine, spoiler alert for the Vader comics. If you haven't read it or don't plan on it, shut your ears, pause, whatever. Otherwise, you're about to get a quick rundown, very paraphrased. Palpatine is punishing Vader. Ochi of Bastoon is paid to hunt Vader down, and Vader's like, he's beaten down, and the Emperor wants Vader to know that I'm the boss here. You failed, and I'm the master. And so you go through series after series after series, and Vader ultimately overcomes like all these challenges, and he ends up getting in fights with like the crime syndicates. It goes a lot of different ways. But the crux of it is that he learns about Exegol, and he knows exactly what the Emperor has planned, and he is resigned to the fact that there's no way to defeat Palpatine. And so in that 1 year, he is just beaten down for a solid year leading up to this. He gets to this point, and it almost makes 7, 8, 9 better, knowing that like Vader knew about some stuff like that. They're doing a lot of damage control, but it does add a little bit to that conversation of why he was so defeated. It's because he knew that the Emperor had already set up a plan to never lose. So what do you do about it?
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with those comments. So that's all between 5 and 6. That's interesting.
Yeah, and it's really good.
And that's another just good enrichment of that scene, because it does make sense for this very subdued Vader that we come in contact with. You know, you would think he already knows the Emperor, and so such a big change makes more sense when you kind of have a little bit more backstory to what all he's experienced. So that's interesting. I hadn't heard that.
So they get to the ship. They're both like goading Luke in. The Emperor's trying to get Luke to take the bait. He's making Luke really mad. You know, he lets him know, you know, the shields will be quite operational or whatever he says, something along those lines. And so he gets Luke really frustrated, and eventually Luke goes to strike the Emperor down. And that starts this showdown between Vader and Luke. And Luke is taking it to him for the greater part of the fight. Like he kicks him down the steps. You see that Luke is much stronger in this past year, and Vader, I don't know if he's weaker, but he certainly hasn't gained any ground on Luke in the previous year. So they're fighting, and it gets to that one part where Vader's trying to lure Luke out, because Luke's like, I'm not gonna fight you, and he's hiding around and stuff. And then Vader throws the sister out there because Luke, I guess, didn't bury it deep down far enough. Vader did not know that there was a sister. He just knew there was Luke. Vader figures that out, and it shows that he's just prodding at Luke as well. And Luke just goes nuts, whips him. It's the opposite of what happens in episode 5, because when Luke hits Vader's arm in 5, Vader goes nuts, pushes him to the side of that little rampway, cuts his hand off, and goes from there. It's the opposite. Luke goes nuts, cuts his hand off, but then steps away and says, no, I'm a Jedi. And that's a super cool scene there. And it's what starts, or not what starts, it's what finishes Anakin's turn to the light side here.
Yeah, there's so many cool parallels throughout this, like just from Luke's initial, when he grabs his lightsaber, right? That goading of like, Palpatine's leaving him with no option. Either he watches his friends die, or he tries to kill Palpatine, right? Like that becomes the only solution to saving him. And so we see this same tactic that Palpatine had with Anakin of like removing all his available options. Like this is the only choice you have now is to attack, right? To do this thing in anger. And he does, right? And it's really cool to see Vader being that prodding evil force again, because he's back in the presence of the Emperor. And so he's like back to being this force again. But yeah, it's so cool, because then we get the same mirror with Palpatine saying, all right, now finish him off. It's like Anakin with Dooku, like the same tactics that he used to try to create this new apprentice. But that's where we see Luke do what his father couldn't, right? He puts down his weapon, he puts down his anger, and he makes that proclamation of, you know, and I love how he connects his father to it, because Anakin's sitting there, Vader's sitting there watching this happen, and he's seeing the dark side fail, right? Like this thing that he thought couldn't be beaten. He tells Luke there's no hope, it's too strong. And then he sits there and watches Luke defy it and do what he could never do. And so it's a really cool moment where the son demonstrates that this thing is possible to the father, which as you said, kind of will head us toward this point of true redemption. There's a lot of really cool mirrors throughout this whole scene.
Yeah, I was gonna say Luke walks it right up to the edge.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And it's I want to say the canon for it is he sees Vader's hand, and he
Hmm.
sees his hand, and it's like
Acknowledges his own. Yeah.
it's another connection, and he's just right there at the edge and steps away. And so then the Emperor shows up, starts electrocuting Luke, and Vader's watching for quite a while.
Yeah.
At least it seems as if it's quite a while for the person getting electrocuted, I'm sure. And then
I would
just
think so. Yeah.
all of a sudden says no and throws the Emperor into the pit and almost
Yeah.
kills him.
Almost kills him. Oh man, you had to sneak that one in there. Yeah, almost kills him. Somehow he returns. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. No, I hadn't thought about this before, but one of the things I was thinking about watching that scene is like Luke's laying on the ground, writhing and saying, "Father, help me," is like literally Anakin's dreams of Shmi and of Padme, right? Where they're saying, "Anakin, help me, please." And so it's again, I don't know if this is on purpose. It seems too perfect to be on purpose considering George just made half the stuff that he went along. But it's so cool that Anakin has these memories. Well, I'm assuming he does, of these visions where he couldn't save his mom. She was calling out for help. He couldn't save Padme. He has this image of her calling out for help, saying, "Please help me." And then here he sees his son, the exact same situation, and he can do something. Like this is finally his moment where he can actually save someone who he was never able to save. And so it's such a cool reflection of those moments where he failed. And Luke has just shown him, hey, the dark can lose, and here's an opportunity for you to do this thing you were never able to successfully do. You were never able to save a loved one. Now you can do it. And so I hadn't thought about that until watching it this time, but it's like in perfect step with all those visions he had of people, of losing people, and now he sees it in front of him where he can actually do something. That was just a really cool thing I never thought of, that again, just from watching these movies the way we've watched them, it just stood out to
Yeah,
me.
I'm glad you took it that way. I took it a completely different way.
Oh,
So,
interesting. Okay.
this one scene when Anakin falls to the dark side, Palpatine is being electrocuted, and he
It's true.
chooses the dark side to save Palpatine. Now, Palpatine's electrocuting himself, but either way, that's what's going down.
Same
And
difference.
Anakin chooses to take out the Jedi to
Hmm.
save the Sith being electrocuted by the Sith. In episode 6, Luke is being electrocuted, and Anakin chooses to destroy the Sith to save the Jedi. It's the
Hmm.
exact opposite
It is,
picture.
yeah.
And so
That's
it's
true.
a full circle moment for Anakin. I'm not sure if, again, like you said, George kind of made up a lot as he went. Now, some things, big picture, it was all there.
Sure.
But some things, a lot was kind of made up on the fly. So it makes you wonder if they did tie in on
Yeah.
purpose. But either way, both of those things that we just said fit the story pretty well.
They do, yeah. Then I hadn't thought about that. It is. It's literally the exact opposite, and it's his fault. It's his fall to his redemption, right? Like the complete
Yep.
opposite scenarios are what facilitate both those things. That is cool. I didn't think about that.
All three trilogies also end with Palpatine electrocuting himself.
That's oh yeah, no, that's true. Sadly, that's true. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but
No. So either way, that's a different story as well. But Vader and Anakin
yeah,
chooses redemption. So he kills Palpatine. He actually does kill him. Palpatine dies there. It's a clone body in 9. So he
yeah,
really does kill him. Or it's a clone with Palpatine's spirit in it. Whatever.
yeah,
Either way, he kills him, and Luke goes out, and Vader's like, "No, that's it for me. Like, just let me see you." So takes the mask off.
yeah,
We get Vader there. It's Sebastian Shaw. Is that the actor's name? I think it is. Maybe.
yeah, something like that.
I think
I
that's
can't
right.
remember.
So
That sounds right.
you see him there, and he's bald and kind of all messed up and everything. But then he says, "Tell your sister you were right," or something like that.
Yeah.
So there is that acknowledgement there, and you get the Skywalker family essentially, or Anakin's story with the Skywalker family. It goes full circle. He's learns he has a son. He learns he has a daughter. He's back on the light side. The balance has been brought to the Force for a few decades. It's a nice, happy ending to Anakin's story. You get his funeral where Luke gets to go, have that moment with him. And then you see Force Ghost Anakin at the end with Obi-Wan and Yoda. I would have to read through it again, but in the new From a Certain Point of View book, you get the story of Obi-Wan teaching Anakin how to become one with the Force, just really quick there as it's all happening. And that's a pretty cool short story. I'll have to like
I'll
send
have to
you,
look that up. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I have to send it to you or something because it's only a few pages, but
yeah.
It's pretty cool too, just how this whole little moment goes full circle there for Anakin.
Yeah, it's such a cool ending for him because in the midst of all the evil and wrong that he's done, but also all the trauma and like messed up stuff he's dealt with, the fact that he goes out like in a state of peace with his son, right? Like with family, like this thing that he fought so hard for previously. It is a really cool ending moment for him. And he makes that comment, you know, Luke's like, "Oh, I got to save you." It's a cheesy line, but it's a great line where he's like, "You already have," Luke, right? Like that he's he's able to go out with some semblance of peace is huge because of all that he's been through and all that he's done, right? Like the amount of guilt and things that he's probably carried throughout his life. To be able to go in that way is great for him.
Yeah.
I'm honestly a little surprised George didn't try to CG Hayden into that scene too. But
I've thought that if he were still in charge, that would end up happening, but it won't. Gone. It will not now, thankfully.
Yeah. So
yeah,
I don't want it to be. Some things need to stay the way they were. You know,
yeah.
The Force Ghost at the end, it's whatever. It's a quick 2 seconds. I don't have an issue with that. But I feel like that line and that moment where those two actors are actually interacting with each other, it would be a shame to change that. So I'm glad that never got CG'd out.
No, I agree. Wrapping up the Return of the Jedi, wrapping up the original trilogy, wrapping up the original story of Star Wars. Now we're gonna keep going with it and tell it as we have it. But as far as 1 through 6 goes, you ties a bow on it perfectly. You get Vader's redeemed, so we see Vader fall. We see Vader become what he becomes and then be redeemed. So that's a cool story. You see Luke and Leia and Han as well, a coming of age story. You see them coming into their own and they win this war that they've been fighting. Leia and Han are going to end up together. So that's going to be like their happy ending. Luke gets his happy ending. The rebellion gets theirs. The Ewoks get their happy ending. Like it's just a great time for everybody. The music at the end's really fun.
It's fun at the end. It's a fun scene.
Yeah, I was dancing around the living room to the music and they're embarrassing Ashley before I came in here. But
fair enough.
It's such a good ending and we always wanted more Star Wars. We got it, but if it had stayed 1 through 6 forever, it still would have been perfect.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the way that the prequels, as much as the prequels had some issues with dialogue and pacing, you know, they do a lot looking back on it to really make the original experience feel even better, right? The original movies were always great, but now having this tie-in of who this person was and how he got to this point and how he's now redeemed from all that, it really does come full circle in a really, really good way. And it's hard to imagine the original without the prequels now, right? Like, as much as they were good on their own, like without that prequel story, it's hard to imagine what it is to view them outside of that. So
it enriches it like
so much.
Tenfold. It's so good.
Honestly, this makes me, you know, you and I are not super sequel fans, right? I am of the mindset like I'm glad that there are people that loved them. I think anything that gets people into Star Wars is great.
It's a good thing.
If it gets you on the train, hop on. Star Wars is awesome. But it just wasn't my cup of tea. But I'm really hoping going through this the way we have and the way it's made everything else better, even stuff I did like, I am hoping as we continue that it's going to give me a slightly better perspective of the sequel movies. So we'll see.
I will say I'm going to watch the sequels as the continuation of Luke and Leia's story to an extent, but to a big extent, Palpatine's story, because you can't tell the Skywalker story without Palpatine. So I'm hopeful, like you said, that I can watch it and be happy with it. So we'll see. I think there's going to be a lot of good. We're not going to be super negative. We're going to try, but I think there's some good to be had.
The whole purpose is just looking at that bigger picture story. And so, I do think looking at it through that lens will help ignore some of those things that that might
It'll keep us
annoy
in
or
our
bother
lane.
you. Yeah.
The What Did Our Wives Think segment, Ashley actually watched like the last hour and a half or so of Return of the Jedi with me. It's her favorite episodic movie, as what I'm pretty sure that's what we had come to the conclusion. I thought it was 4, but I think it is 6 from what she was saying. But she enjoys it. Everyone enjoys it. You're having an earthquake there.
I just bumped this thing real. I've been drinking this water like crazy. I've had an itch in my throat all day, and I am trying to not just go into like a coughing fit. So
y'all do have earthquakes.
It's annoying.
So you never know.
We do, yeah. Every now and then we have little ones that nothing big, thankfully. But
did Brittany watch this one with you?
Yeah, no, she did watch this one with me. Watched the whole thing. She hates the CG editions.
I do too.
Hated the Jabba scene, palace with all that nonsense. The end where they're showing all the location celebrations, she's like, I feel like it's just a distraction. I was like, that's fair. Yeah, I get
when they're pulling down the statue and everything.
Yeah. So
yeah, I'm not a fan.
She loves Ewoks. Big fan of Ewoks. Doesn't like watching them die. But no, I think overall she enjoyed it. I think the original trilogy was much more enjoyable to her than the prequels. I think when you're not a big Star Wars fan, focus on the story. Some of those things annoy you a little bit more. So, but no, I think she really enjoyed the originals.
Looking ahead, I'm thinking it's going to be. We need 3 straight weeks to do 7, 8, and 9. So I don't want to start that before the new year. So I think first week of January, we should start 7, 8, and 9. So I'm thinking maybe we have a couple bonus episodes over the next 3 to 4 weeks. So maybe next week we talk about our favorite Star Wars things of 2023. Just a quick podcast talking about our favorite things that happened. Nothing the week of Christmas, because that week's just... That's going to be busy.
Well, and I'll be traveling. I'm sure you're doing some traveling.
Yeah. And so then maybe the following week, so leading up to like New Year's Eve, I thought it would be cool to have an episode where we talk about what we hope happens in 2024.
I really like the favorite things of 2023. That's going to be a good one to do.
Yeah, it's like a Star Wars year in review for us.
Yeah. Gosh, I can't even, like, at this point, everything's so blurred together. I don't even know what was in 2023, quite honestly.
So I can give you a quick rundown. The video game
Survivor,
not Jedi Survivor, not Fallen Order. Visions. We had the
second
Bad
season
Batch.
Of Visions. Yep, Bad Batch.
Second season Bad Batch and Ahsoka. Mandalorian was also 2023. We forgot the Mandalorian season 3. There's a lot to talk about, so we're going to talk about. Let's talk about our favorite and least favorite Star Wars things of 2023.
I'm good with that. That'll be good.
And then 2024, the couple weeks later, we'll talk about what we want to see in 2024 out of Star Wars.
Well, I know part of mine's gone. I know Andor got pushed back to 25, so I'm bummed about that. I loved Andor. I know that's a hot topic among Star Wars fans, but I loved it.
It's not my favorite, but it's not my least either. I like it.
Yeah. Anytime I can get more Andy Serkis in my Star Wars, I'm all for it.
For sure. So that's it for us for episode 16. We have talked Return of the Jedi and a little bit more. So you heard it here first. Next week, our first ever bonus episode, you will see our favorite parts of Star Wars in 2023. Thanks for watching, and catch one of these 2 videos next.